Thanks. I got to say, it'll be a surprise to most of my family that I love everything, but that's cool. Yeah, so as PJ said, my name's Ken Mugrage. I work in the office of the CTO at Thoughtworks. So I probably should position this a little bit to let you know that some of this, especially the first few slides, might feel like it's an ad for Thoughtworks. I swear it's not. Trying to set up why we're doing things the way we are from a communications perspective, and then show you how you can use some of the formats that we've used to help communicate with our different distributed offices and so forth. So as a software consultancy, as a delivery company, we really see, or I should say my boss, the CTO, sees the role of a CTO's office as really being forward-looking. What's the technology that's coming? How should we react to it? How do we build capabilities? All of those sorts of things so that we're ahead of the curve when our clients say, hey, we need help. So why is this a challenge? So when I joined Thoughtworks it's been about 12 years. I think we were around 2,000 or 3,000 people. We're now up over 8,000. I think we just added a couple more offices in Europe this year. So I think we're at 48 offices right now. And again, the reason I bring this up is because that's obviously very widely distributed and we have communication issues to iron out. At the same time, we're reasonably well known for being very opinionated. So at last count, there was over 100 books written by thought workers on a variety of topics. I mean, everything from microservices to continuous delivery to databases, et cetera, et cetera. And so while the types of topics are widely varied, there is one thing that they all have in common is they tend to be very opinionated. And so our challenge then is you're a growing software consultancy full of opinionated technologists. How do you stay in sync? How do you keep people on the same page without mandating a bunch of things? We don't believe in top-down technology. Frankly, it just doesn't work. And so I'm going to go through a couple of the ways that we do that and show you how you can use some of the tools and techniques we've created to do this. So split this in two audiences. The first audience I want to talk about is the practitioners. If you follow any ThoughtWorks people, you'll see technologists show up a lot in job titles and so forth. To us, a technologist is anyone that's working with the technology. So, I mean, it's not just developers; it's business analysts, it's client principals and iteration managers and whatever you want to call it, all the roles. So the first thing I'm going to go to was created specifically for practitioners, for people that are doing the work. As I understand, probably most of the people in this audience, frankly. So we came out with a publication about 11 years ago internally, and I think it published publicly about the same time, called the Technology Radar. And you may have seen this. Again, it was originally a communication mechanism. It was a way for somebody in a ThoughtWorks office in London to say, hey, I'm starting a new project. It's going to be web-based. What are the technologies that we are using, that we've had success with, that we've had challenges with, et cetera. So it's not meant to be neither this or the looking glass that I'll go into later. These are not trend reports in the traditional sense. So they're not just observational. It's not that, a whole lot of people are Googling this right now, or a lot of people are asking us about it, or even that. It's really meant to be advisory. This is our experience. This is the actionable advice. And I think that's really important for anything you create internally, that it's actionable. So what is the radar? At a glance, it's rings and quadrants. So the quadrants, you'll see what the four of them are in a little bit in ours. The rings are probably the more important part. So in the rings, we have in their internal, so think of this like a radar, things that are closer to you, is adopt. And so these are the things that we feel strongly that you should be looking at, that you should be using, etc. The next one out is trial. So we've played with this a little bit. It's worth pursuing. It's good to understand it. Maybe you're going to use it, maybe you're not, but you're trying it out. You're proving it for you. Assess is, think about it. Hey, this is out there. You take a look at it. And hold, It's interesting because in the official one, like here, it says proceed with caution. The truth is that internally, we pretty much means don't do it. Something is on hold. Now, again, an important thing here is that these are statements of fact for ThoughtWorks. So a blip, a thing, and you'll see, again, I'll get into what those things are, cannot show up like in adopt or trial if we haven't used it on a client project and had some experience with it. So often we'll get questions that say, hey, there's this thing that came out and we know it works well. We've been using it for a long time, and yet it's only in assess on your radar. That is because we have not used it in such a way that it's shown up there. And so it's really, it is advice based on our experience, and it is a wide depth and breadth of experience. But again, it is specific to us. There will be things that show up here that you're like, that's not really mainstream yet, and things that are like, why isn't that there? And that's why we've also, you'll see in a minute, created the ability for you to create your own. So the other thing, radar, the blips, the dots on the radar, they show up, they move around, and they go away. And I pulled this one out as an example because this is a fairly typical life cycle. So this blip was created in 2006 or 2016, excuse me, under the assess ring. And it's a blip called micro front ends. And basically what this was is, hey, we're getting larger, like, single page apps and all of those kinds of things. And it makes sense to have, we're a big believers in self-organized teams and product-based teams. And it makes sense to be able to have a front end that is micro front ends. It's many different teams working on a feature that are combined into a single user experience. And so we started assessing this in 2016. And then I think in the last year or two, it became adopt, so something we regularly do. And this is the most recent published version, which came out in May of 2020 for this particular blip. The new radar came out in October. And so, we're talking about it out there, and it's adopt now, and it's mainstream, and we've written articles about it and so forth. But at the same time, often blips will, and really if you think about any term, PJ mentioned I hang out in the DevOps community quite a bit, and talk about your overused or misused words. Things have unintended effects or things that go wrong or what have you. And so these might either move then, this one didn't, but they might move from adopt to hold or something like that, or they might create new blips. So we have a new blip that showed up in October called micro front end anarchy. And basically this is saying, hey, okay, wait a minute. We've talked about this micro front end and the ability to have, for instance, multiple front end frameworks or so forth. But we're not saying just use everything. We don't want to have, like the example here is that, there's React and Angular in the same single page application. And yeah, it's technically possible. And yes, those are empowered teams and so forth. But maybe that's not the best idea. So this is what I mean by, the micro front end blip is still in adopt, but this anarchy of, hey, let's exercise some restraint here is actually on hold. We don't think you should do this. So that's an example. Another thing is, there's only so much room on the radar. And so things that are obvious don't go on the radar. So people ask me all the time, what you don't use Java or C# or, pick your language here. Yeah, every day. And it's fairly obvious, so it doesn't go on the radar. Again, there's only roughly 100 blips on any particular edition of a radar. And so we couldn't possibly have every public cloud service and every programming language and every framework. There's a new framework, JavaScript framework, I think it's about every 3.5 hours. So you just couldn't possibly have one there. Occasionally, like an early version of, I'll just pick on Java. An early version of Java might go on hold because it's been deprecated for a long time. And there's no support or something like that. But it doesn't show up if it's truly obvious. It also doesn't show up if it hasn't moved in a while. I think it's 2 editions, if I remember right. I could be wrong on that. But basically, if something goes into adopt and it just sits there, then it falls off the radar to make room for something else. And so this is a bit of an eye chart, and you're not meant to read all of this, but this is the screenshot of our current our most recent, I should say, version of the Thoughtworks Radar. And there's a new one coming out in a few weeks. But as you can see, the quadrants are techniques, platforms, tools, languages, and frameworks. Now, the group that creates this is Doppler, that reports to Octo or reports to Rebecca, the CTO. They care about which quadrant, of course, but not a lot, if I'm honest. It could be argued in some of these cases that, oh, that's a technique, or that's a platform, not a tool. That's a tool, not a platform, et cetera. But that matters. But what's more important are the rings. Is this something you should adopt? Is this something we're trying out? Is this something we could think about? And you see, like in this version, there was nothing that was in hold because everything nothing had changed in those two in the last couple editions. Now, the point of this talk is to tell you that, again, this has been a very effective communication mechanism for us. You can go to our website, you can download the latest version, you can subscribe to new ones. My marketing folks would love that. But the real point is that we've also released the tools to build your own. So like you can go to thoughtworks.com/radar/BYOR, and it'll walk you through the instructions. Basically, you create a Google Sheet, you create your quadrants and your rings, and you populate the data, and you go and it'll create this visualization for you. And it's a really good way to, again, communicate inside your organization. What are the things we're looking at? What are we using? What are we like not to use, and so forth. Now, I do want to be careful. I often see the word governance thrown around with this, where people will say, hey, yeah, we manage our governance. These are the things you're allowed to use. That was not our intent, and we don't work that way. So Dr. Rebecca Parsons is our CTO. She does not mandate to, like, the heads of tech for a region or a market, thou shalt use this framework and not that one. A tremendous amount of research goes into this, and then it's presented to them as information and as advice. They need to react based on their market and their client and their capabilities and so forth. And I highly recommend the same thing to you. Don't make this where, oh, check the radar, and if the thing's not on there, you're not allowed to use it, or you must use it. I'm a huge believer, and I think all of Thoughtworks is huge believers in self-organized teams. Again, don't go to anarchy. But teams should be able to choose the best thing for them. A couple examples of things that people have done publicly. Porsche, the auto manufacturer, has actually published a couple of these. So I didn't put the URL on there. You can Google it. It's like my Porsche something. They did their own tech radar where they're saying, hey, these are things we're adopting. These are things we're trying out, et cetera. It varies radically from ours, as it should, because they have a different thing they're trying to solve. The thing on the lower right there is the folks at Spotify used the API to talk to their, oh my gosh, they have a thing for managing services, and it's like service discovery kind of, but they talked to the API to create a visualization from that. And so you can go in and see where are the things we're using. Again, they did languages, frameworks, infrastructure, and process. So their quadrants are different. But again, the takeaway here is that it's been very effective to us. We've worked it for a long time. And actually, if I go back one slide, I mentioned you can go to BYOR to create it with a spreadsheet. There's also on GitHub, we've open sourced the infrastructure too. So if you don't want to use ours to build it for privacy reasons or what have you, we're not trying to steal your data, I promise. You can go to GitHub and take it and create it yourself. Okay. So I mentioned at the beginning that there's the practitioner audience, which is primarily what the radar is for, because it is programming languages and tools and very specific things. The other audience is, the business leaders, and I don't want to perpetuate the technology versus business. I mean, to me, every business is technology. Matter of fact, spoiler alert for my next slide. What we mean by this is there are people that are setting strategy. There's the recruiters. There's leadership and capability development. There's mergers and acquisitions, et cetera. And so we also needed something for them that wasn't specific to a language or a framework. It was a little bit more high level and longer vision. And so, the cliche is every company is a software company. Like many cliches, it's said, or it came because it's true. It used to be that the business would say, oh, we're going to go into a new market, or we're going to try a new thing, or what have you. And then, hey, IT organization, this is the decision we've made. Now react. And the IT organization is like, oh, wait a minute, I don't know how to build that. I don't have that capability. I don't have that expertise. And I got this big 18-month project plan, and I have to go build it, and I don't even know how. And so we want to avoid that. That's bad. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we started creating internally something that we called the technology strategy. And it was, again, a larger focus, and you'll see here in a second, very internal, but actionable advice. Again, it's not just observation. It is these are trends we've seen. This is how we think we should react. This is how our competitors are reacting. This is the actual advice. This year, we decided for the first time to publish most of the content publicly. And so we created this thing called the Thoughtworks Looking Glass, hence the title of this talk, bringing tech-led business changes into focus. So the Looking Glass is 120-some trends, and those are grouped into 6 what we're calling lenses for the sake of this. And again, I'm going to go through what some of ours are. I'm not going to go into depth, but I want to talk to you about how to use this kind of process, how we use this kind of process to help drive our business and inform our business. And so very much behind the curtain here, but this is what we do, how we've become successful. So these are the lenses. And I'm going to go into 3 of them in a little more depth, but just at a high level, humanity augmented is machine learning, AI, those kinds of things, but not as a replacement to humans, as augmentation. So using those kinds of systems to inform human choice or to make things easier to figure out. Accelerating towards sustainability it's about sustainability, but it's not just green cloud or energy conservation or that. It's the acceleration towards it and how regulations are coming faster and consumer accountability, this is a good thing, is going up, where consumers are expecting you to work towards these goals and so forth. People are making choices based on companies that are or are not operating in a sustainable manner. Evolving interactions talks about the ways that we interact with systems, with technical systems, as opposed to typing on a keyboard necessarily. Voice access, gestures, AR, VR, those types of things, and where we think those are going. Some real big advancements there, as we all know. Morphing of the computing fabric is what we're phrasing the latest evolution of how we actually do compute. From mainframes to client server to et cetera. But now, if we look at the fabric itself, there's, and I'm going to go into this a little bit more in detail in a bit, but edge networks and, of course, cloud and things like that. But also things like processor types. I mean, there are certain types of processors that are more efficient at machine learning than other types, et cetera, and looking at that. The next one, coopetition forces platforms into ecosystems. A lot of really strange words there that were chosen very carefully. And this is just the idea of, that you have to play nice in an ecosystem these days if you want to succeed. If you want to show up on the dash on people's automobile, you probably have to work with CarPlay or Android Auto in the future, that type of thing. And then the expanding impact of hostile tech. And again, I'll go on this one a little bit more. This isn't just hackers and ransomware. This is privacy and data gathering and surveillance and all of that, and how we just need to be super hyper aware of this. So the way this breaks down is, and again, you're not expected to read all this, just trying to give you an overview of how this all works, is we have a matrix of trends to watch, and there's 2 axes, if you will. So there's our advice. We think you should adopt this. They're here today. You need to work. You need to be aware to do this. Analyze is starting to gain traction. Think about it depending on your industry, on the use case, et cetera. And anticipate is, it's not mature, but it could have an impact in a few years. We have things like quantum computing here and that sort of thing. So again, they would never show up on the tech radar because that's today practitioner. But this is things to think about in the future. The other axis is the timeline. So seen now, beginning to be seen on the horizon. We think this is mostly factual. So this isn't really interpretation. And so are these common? Is it uncommon? Is it really in the future? Now, one thing to note is, again, our version of this, and I'm encouraging you to create your own, our version of this is at a global technology level. It's advisory, again, to our different regions and markets. Like if you were looking at the one about interactions, you might say, and you're in the gaming industry, you might see what we say about augmented reality or virtual reality and say, that's hogwash. This isn't just beginning to be seen. This has been out for years. It's commonplace. You can buy a headset from Steam. And that's true for that industry, but that's not necessarily true for an industrial manufacturing company. My dog says hi, apologies. So it could become true for them, but it's not necessarily right off the bat. Yes, that's what happens when you have a Great Dane and COVID. Okay, so moving along. Another thing that's really came out to us while we were working on it that we think is probably as interesting as the individual trends, if not more, is considering their interaction with each other. So, when we talk about humanity augmented, that's machine learning and AI and so forth. When you're creating those things, when you're creating models, especially ones that are helping drive what humans are going to do, you have to be hyper aware of things like bias that show up in these models and so forth. So, a lot of the trends will show up in more than one matrix because there's interactions. And so I highly encourage you to really think about those when you're thinking about the stuff. Okay, so I'm going to drive into a little bit deeper into 3 of the lenses, hopefully a little bit towards the flavor of what I believe this audience would expect, and then go into how we create it. So the first one, the morphing of the compute fabric. And if you go download the PDF, no registration required. It's just a click download. There's definitions of all these things. But this is the one for morphing of the compute fabric. And so like one of the things that you see a lot, again, we talk about the interactivity. So one of the comments I saw very early was that 5G, which I was personally involved with some of this research, is in beginning to see and anticipate. And you could say, well, wait a minute. If you watch television for more than 3 minutes, you're going to see a 5G commercial. And while that's true, consumer handsets and that kind of thing, they're trying to sell them, and everyone's trying to promote their service, et cetera. The truth is that if you are an enterprise and you're building an application, I don't think it's ready for you to rely on 5G, at least consumer 5G, because the fast versions of it, the small band 5G, is only in very few cities. And so if you're working on edge computing, moving the compute or data management or whatever closer to the consumer or the device or the audience, and you're relying on 5G to make that low latency, it's not going to work in very many cities. I mean, that's just the reality. And so it's needing to be aware of those things and cross-function it. So this audience, when you're creating applications, think about those types of things. So the opportunity here, and again, we want this to be not just observation, but what's in it for you to think about these things and so forth. For this, you have to think about your location and how you're moving the data around. I mean, we just saw a talk about, databases and the size of the data sets and so forth. If you're, again, let's say you are in an industrial application where 5G or Wi-Fi 6 or something does make a lot of sense, and you're relying on that low latency. If you're backhauling all that data, to a different continent's data center, you've just lost the benefit of building that 5G private network. And so you need to think about those kinds of things. And then the customer expectations. I use my CarPlay, and I have an iPhone, and so I use CarPlay. And when something fails, I get frustrated with the device when in fact it probably wasn't the device. It was the cloud or the connection or the cell service or whatever. But you need to understand this as an organization. Consumers aren't going to make that differentiation. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. They don't care why. So the advice here is, evaluate the full range. First, we talked about the hardware options. I said it a little bit earlier, like certain processor types are better at machine learning algorithms than others, et cetera. Do that. It can have a substantial effect on not only your speed, but also your bill. When you're looking at your distributed computing, again, think about not only the latency, but also the network costs. Think about architecture patterns that are independently deployable, so you can do things like edge, and invest in improving your distributed systems capabilities. So can you do application monitoring? Can you do tracing? Do you know how to manage these things? Okay, lens 5, second one we're going to go today is the co-opetition forces platforms into ecosystems. What this is talking about is we all want to build platforms. Okay, if I'm an airline, I want to have my website and my mobile app and so forth, and that's good. But the truth is that the market is saying that if I can't go onto my travel aggregator, if I can't go onto Expedia or Travelocity or whatever and see your flights with good fares, you're not going to get chosen. Although as an airline, I might want people to come to my site, the truth is that they don't. They more and more consumers are saying, no, if you're going to work in my car, it's got to be CarPlay. If I'm going to fly on you, you have to work with my corporate travel agency, et cetera. So there's lots of things to work about here. And notice like edge computing is in this one and the last one. So lots to do here. The opportunity here is hopefully pretty clear. It's capturing customers where you're not seeing them now, people that aren't coming to your website, et cetera. It's very important that you treat this as a product. So if you're going to build an API and expect somebody else's ecosystem to consume it and therefore make it available to their consumers, then you have to have documentation and you have to manage it like a product. So advice here is, again, think beyond just the platform. So it's not just build your platform that allows you to do all the continuous delivery and DevOps things, and that's really cool. But you also have to think about how you're going to interact with the wider ecosystem. And again, a bit of a cliche, but meet consumers where they are. So act fast, but be flexible and look for those new connections from a business perspective. Who are the ecosystem partners that I could play with? And then Lens 6 is the expanding impact of hostile tech. And again, there are certainly things on here about security. So secure software delivery is the idea that your pipeline system and your chain, your software, that's the right way to, the chain of custody, your software value stream, all of that is secure, that you're watching these things, et cetera. That's very important. But also think about privacy and privacy by design and those types of concepts where don't capture data you don't need, et cetera. Consumers are starting to make real choices. I mean, we had what part of our research, I had a conversation with one of the analysts about this, and there certainly are, there's a large percentage of people who are like, I don't care if they see what I'm searching about or see what I'm talking about on my social media or whatever, and show me ads that I want to see, because that's what I want. I want to see ads that are targeted to me. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum, people like me that have like 3 different ad blockers and, so forth. And so you just need to be aware of that. You need to understand that consumers are making choices based on privacy. So, please, you have to protect against the malware and the hacking and ransomware and all that, but think about the other parts of hostility. Algorithm bias, be respectful of your customers' wishes, the spooky targeting again, et cetera. So the advice, some of this you've heard 1,000 times, I'm sure, security is everyone's problem, but also, promote your positive privacy stance. You see, like Apple does ads about their privacy policies and their hardware. Create an explicit framework. So internally, like, know what your framework is, know what your policies are. So like this example is for bias, have policies for detecting and avoiding bias in these systems, have policies for the type of data you're going to capture, test for those things. That's really important. So how do we create this, and how should you create it? It's not a go plug in a Google Sheet like the radar is. This one's a little bit more work, but how do we create it? So first off, we surveyed the entire company, believe it or not. So opened up, we did a spreadsheet. We said, here are the existing trends in the last edition. Which ones should we drop? What should we add? What should change, et cetera. Open that up for a while. And then our office, the office of the CTO, voted on them. Which ones are we going to keep? Which ones are going to add? Those sorts of things. Started doing a bunch of research. Uncovered the common themes. So we didn't create the themes or the lenses and say, okay, we want to talk about ecosystems. Now, what are the trends for that? We looked at the trends, and from that, the lenses emerge. I think that's an important thing, or else your data is going to be very biased. Did a ton of research and writing. Okay, so understand this is not a day's worth of work. This took us months. And so talking with analysts, talking with the industry, everything. So these are a lot of work. And then as we finished writing up the individual trends and the lenses, we opened everything up for review. And so again, very important, because like in my group's, I think 10 people, And we certainly have our views and our things, but we also have our own bubble. And we wanted everybody to come and say, oh, no, I've seen something different from that. And I have expertise, or I used to work at a gaming company, or whatever it happens to be. And only then did it actually get published. So how do we actually use it? As I mentioned, the markets in our regions use it as guidance, and that's what I suggest. Again, this is not thou shalt. This isn't, hey, Germany, we have 3 or 4 offices there, you need to go do this. They will take this as guidance, see what the global trends are, and then react to their market. And again, I don't suggest that you try to make this governance. But then our learning and development used to guide our own capabilities. What should we be training people on? What kind of resources do we need to make available? Our people groups use it for recruiting. Do we need to be hiring this expertise? Those sorts of things. So again, it helps guide our business. So as I mentioned, 2 publications for 2 different audiences. So the radar is the practitioner level technical advice, really now to the next 12 months. The looking glass, the strategic business advice, is now for the next several years. So some of this is very, very far out there, and some of it's fairly certain or fairly up close. So some other advice on creating your own of any of these. First off, don't chase shiny objects. PJ joked about it when we first started as technologists. We all love to go play with the latest thing and so forth. But, look at it critically and say, is this of value to my business? Are we, to my market with my competitive outlook, et cetera. Make sure you're really having a reason why other than it's cool and it's shiny. Be honest about your capabilities. So, if you're looking at something where, VR, AR is cool, maybe Apple comes out with their wearables, glasses, whatever. Be honest about your capabilities, but don't be afraid to change them. Don't say, oh, I can't go after that because we don't have any expertise in that area. Go create the expertise, train people, acquire somebody, merge with somebody, whatever it happens to be. Get feedback throughout the process because, again, things change. You can't watch everything all the time. And you're never done. So this is a continuous process. We're right now working on the trends for the next looking glass, and this one just published 2 months ago. This is a continuous process. The last piece of guiding stuff is, I mentioned that things don't show up on the radar if they're obvious. When it comes to a strategic or tech strategy or business strategy or, frankly, any strategy, advice isn't strategic if somebody wouldn't choose to do the opposite. So don't come out with a strategy statement that says we're going to be the best, or we're going to be the number 1 product, or we're going to be the leading choice, because nobody would choose to be the last choice. Nobody would choose to be the worst. Okay, that's not strategic. That's hopefully obvious. So strategic is we're going to choose that type of deployment versus this type, or we're going to choose this market versus that, or we're going to go after augmented reality, or we're not. So if you're making advice, if you're trying to make these decisions, make them stuff that's not obvious.